August the 26th, Sunday. Nearly late for church, Mrs. James having talked considerably about what to wear all the morning. Lupin does not seem to get on very well with Mrs. James. August the 27th. Carrie and Mrs. James went off shopping, and had not returned when I came back from the office. Judging from the subsequent conversation, I am afraid Mrs. James is filling Carrie's head with a lot of nonsense about dress. I walked over to Goings and asked him to drop in to supper and make things pleasant. Carrie prepared a little extemporized supper, consisting of the remainder of the cold joint, a small piece of salmon, which I was to refuse in case there was not enough to go round, and a blancmange and custards. There was also a decanter of port and some jam puffs on the sideboard. Mrs. James made us play a rather good game of cards called muggings. To my surprise, in fact disgust, Lupin got up in the middle and in a most sarcastic tone said, "Pardon me, this sort of thing is too fast for me. I shall go and enjoy a quiet game of marbles in the back garden." August the 29th. Mrs. James is making a positive fool of Carrie. Carrie appeared in a new dress like a smock frock. She said smocking was all the rage. I replied that it put me in a rage. She also had on a hat as big as a kitchen coal scuttle, and the same shape. Mrs. James went home, and both Lupin and I were somewhat pleased. The first time we've agreed on a single subject since his return. Merkins and Son write they have no vacancy for Lupin. October the 30th. I should very much like to know who has wilfully torn the last 5 or 6 weeks out of my diary. Perfectly monstrous. I asked Carrie if she knew anything about it. She replied that it was my own fault for leaving the diary about with a charwoman cleaning and sweeps in the house. I called to Sarah and asked her about the diary. She said that she had not been in the sitting room at all. After the sweep had left, Mrs. Birrell, the charwoman, had cleaned the room and lighted the fire herself. Finding a burnt piece of paper in the grate, I examined it, and found it was a piece of my diary. So it was evident someone had torn my diary to light the fire. November the 2nd. I spent the evening quietly with Carrie, of whose company I never tire. We had a most pleasant chat about the letters on Is Marriage a Failure? It has been no failure in our case. In talking over our own happy experiences, we never noticed that it was past midnight. We were startled by hearing the door slam violently. Lupin had come in. He made no attempt to turn down the gas in the passage, or even to look into the room where we were, but went straight up to bed, making a terrible noise. I asked him to come down for a moment, and he begged to be excused as he was dead beat, an observation that was scarcely consistent with the fact that for a quarter of an hour afterwards he was positively dancing in his room and shouting out, "See me dance the polka," or some such nonsense. November the 3rd. Good news at last. Mr. Perkup has got an appointment for Lupin, and he is to go and see about it on Monday. Oh, how my mind is relieved. I went to Lupin's room to take the good news to him, but he was in bed, very seedy, and so I resolved to keep it over until the evening. He said he had last night been elected a member of an amateur dramatic club called the Holloway Comedians, and though it was a pleasant evening, he'd sat in a draught and got neuralgia in the head. He declined to have any breakfast, so I left him. In the evening I had a special bottle of port, and Lupin being in for a wonder, we filled our glasses, and I said, "Lupin, my boy, I have some good and unexpected news for you. Mr. Perkup has procured you an appointment." Lupin said, "Good biz." We drained our glasses. Lupin then said, "Fill up the glasses again, for I've got some good and unexpected news for you." I had some slight misgivings, and so evidently had Carrie, for she said, "I hope we shall think it's good news." Lupin said, "Oh, it's all right. I'm engaged to be married." November 5th, Sunday. Carrie and I troubled about that mere boy, Lupin, getting engaged to be married without consulting us or anything. After dinner he told us all about it. He said the lady's name was Daisy Mutlar, and she was the nicest, prettiest, and most accomplished girl he ever met. He loved her the moment he saw her, and if he had to wait 50 years, he would wait, and he knew that she would wait for him. He lived with an object now, and that was to make Daisy Mutlar Daisy Pooter, and he would guarantee she would not disgrace the family of the Pooters. Carrie here burst out crying and threw her arms round his neck, and in doing so upset the glass of port he held in his hand all over his new light trousers. I said I had no doubt we should like Miss Mutlar when we saw her, but Carrie said she loved her already. I thought this rather premature, but held my tongue. Daisy Mutlar was the sole topic of conversation for the remainder of the day. I asked Lupin who her people were, and he replied, "Oh, you know Mutlar, Williams and Watts." I did not know, but refrained from asking any further questions at present, for fear of irritating Lupin. November 6th. Lupin went with me to the office and had a long conversation with Mr. Perkup, our principal, the result of which was that he accepted a clerkship in the firm of Job Cleanands and Company, stock and share brokers. Lupin told me privately it was an advertising firm, and he did not think much of it. I replied, beggars should not be choosers, and I will do Lupin the justice to say that he looked rather ashamed of himself. November the 7th. Lupin asked Carrie to call on Mrs. Mutlar, but Carrie said she thought Mrs. Mutlar ought to call on her first. I agreed with Carrie, and this led to an argument. However, the matter was settled by Carrie saying that she could not find any visiting cards, and we must get some more printed, and when they were finished would be quite time enough to discuss the etiquette of calling. November the 8th. I ordered some of our cards at Black's, the stationer's. I ordered 25 of each, which will last us a good long time. In the evening, Lupin brought in Frank Mutlar, Miss Mutlar's brother. He was rather a gawky youth, and Lupin said he was the most popular and best amateur in the club, referring to the Holloway comedians. Lupin whispered to us that if we could only draw out Frank a bit, he would make us roar with laughter. At supper, young Mutlar did several amusing things. He took up a knife, and with the flat part of it, played a tune on his cheek in a wonderful manner. He also gave an imitation of an old man with no teeth, smoking a big cigar. The way he kept dropping the cigar sent Carrie into fits. In the course of conversation, Daisy's name cropped up, and young Mutlar said he would bring his sister round to us one evening, his parents being rather old-fashioned and not going out much. Carrie said we would get up a little special party. As young Mutlar showed no inclination to go, and it was approaching 11 o'clock, as a hint, I reminded Lupin that he had to be up early tomorrow. Instead of taking the hint, Mutlar began a series of comic imitations. He went on for an hour without cessation. Poor Carrie could scarcely keep her eyes open. At last she made an excuse and said good night. Mutlar then left, and I heard him and Lupin whispering in the hall something about the Holloway comedians. And to my disgust, although it was past midnight, Lupin put on his hat and coat and went out with his new companion. November the 9th. My endeavours to discuss who tore the sheets out of my diary still fruitless. Lupin has Daisy Mutlar on the brain, so we see little of him, except that he invariably turns up at mealtimes. Cummings dropped in. November 10th. Lupin seems to like his new berth. That's a comfort. Daisy Mutlar, the sole topic of conversation during tea. Carrie, almost as full of it as Lupin. November 12th, Sunday. Coming home from church, Carrie and I met Lupin, Daisy Mutlar, and her brother. Daisy was introduced to us, and we walked home together, Carrie walking on with Miss Mutlar. We asked them in for a few minutes, and I had a good look at my future daughter-in-law. My heart quite sank. She's a big young woman, and I should think at least 8 years older than Lupin. I did not even think her good-looking. Carrie asked her if she could come in on Wednesday next with her brother to meet a few friends. She replied that she would be only too pleased. November 13th. Carrie sent out invitations to Going, the Cummings, to Mr. and Mrs. James of Sutton, and Mr. Stillbrook. I wrote a note to Mr. Fraunching of Peckham. Carrie said we may as well make it a nice affair, and why not ask our principal, Mr. Perkup? I said I feared we were not quite grand enough for him. Carrie said there was no offence in asking him. I said certainly not, and wrote him a letter. Carrie confessed she was a little disappointed with Daisy Mutlar's appearance, but thought she seemed a nice girl. November 14th. Everybody so far has accepted for our quite grand little party for tomorrow. Mr. Perkup, in a nice letter, which I shall keep, wrote that he was dining in Kensington, but if he could get away, he would come up to Holloway for an hour. Carrie was busy all day, making little cakes and open jam puffs and jellies. She said she felt quite nervous about her responsibilities tomorrow evening. We decided to have some light things on the table, such as sandwiches, cold chicken and ham, and some sweets, and on the sideboard a nice piece of cold beef and a tongue for the more hungry ones to peg into if they liked. Going called to know if he was to put on swallowtails tomorrow. Carrie said that he'd better dress, especially as Mr. Fraunching was coming, and there was a possibility of Mr. Perkup also putting in an appearance. Going said, "Oh, I only wanted to know, for I've not worn my dress coat for some time, and I was sent it to have the creases pressed out." After Going left, Lupin came in, and in his anxiety to please Daisy Mutlar, carped at and criticised the arrangements, and in fact disapproved of everything, including our having asked our old friend Cummings, who, he said, would look in evening dress like a greengrocer engaged to wait, and who must not be surprised if Daisy took him for one. I fairly lost my temper, and I said, "Lupin, allow me to tell you, Miss Daisy Mutlar is not the Queen of England. I gave you credit for more wisdom than to allow yourself to be inveigled into an engagement with a woman considerably older than yourself. I advise you to think of earning your living before entangling yourself with a wife whom you will also have to support, and in all probability her brother also, who appeared to be nothing but a loafer." Instead of receiving this advice in a sensible manner, Lupin jumped up and said, "If you insult the lady I'm engaged to, you insult me. I will leave the house and never darken the doors again." He went out of the house, slamming the hall door. But it was all right. He came back to supper, and we played bezique till nearly 12 o'clock.